There we go, got a quorum. All right, so I'll call the meeting to order. And I'll let the members of the subcommittee that are currently here introduce themselves. So I'm Roy Dahl. I'm the chair of the subcommittee of the plan update for Hillcrest.
Hello, I'm Brer Marsh.
Hi, I'm Matt Wallstrom.
Okay, since we have, and now we got loose, so we definitely have a quorum now. All right, now that we have a quorum, we can get started with the meeting. So tonight, the city is going to be presenting some things on the transportation elements. So I will turn it over to the city to start the presentation.
All right, is everybody able to see my screen? Great, all right, great. So we'll go ahead and start. So today we're presenting, as Roy had mentioned, on mobility. This is the Plan Hillcrest Uptown Planners Subcommittee Meeting. Tonight we have Shannon Mulderig, Project Manager of the Hillcrest Focused Plan Amendment. Shannon's not feeling well today, but we'll be listening in on the discussion. Myself, Claudia Brizuela from the Sustainability and Mobility Department. I'm the lead on mobility for this Focused Plan Amendment, as well as Monique Chen from Chen Ryan Associates, assisting me with mobility. Some housekeeping for tonight. The chat function will only be enabled during the public comment and discussion portion of tonight's meeting for you all to share your thoughts or questions. When we get to the discussion portion, please use the raise hand function to let us know you would like to speak. This presentation is going to be made available on the planhillcrest.org. Actually, it's available right now if you'd like to follow along under meetings and the updates tab. And if you wish to open this up on your screen and follow along, feel free. We'll also upload the chat log and this recording on the website following the meeting. Today, we'll go over the mobility planning process for the Focused Plan Amendment. We'll touch on the review of existing needs from our existing conditions phase, highlight the Plan Hillcrest objectives. Then we will go over the network options we previously presented to the group and refinements that we've made, followed by our recommended mobility network. And then we'll share the next steps in the process and upcoming subcommittee meetings and workshops. An overview of the mobility planning process is as follows. We start with research and data collection of the mobility system, compile our findings and analyses in an existing conditions report, providing a baseline of how well the transportation system serves all of its users. We then work to develop different network alternatives and concepts, and we coordinate with several stakeholders, including the community, and make refinements based on engineering feasibility and the community input we've received. We're here today to present and receive some more feedback as well. And then we move into the phase where we have a recommended network to model using our regional travel forecast model, pairing it with land use for the community. After modeling is complete, we conduct our mobility analysis, which we will come back and present at a later time. And then all of this will go into the mobility element, which is a chapter of the community plan. So looking at where we are in the process, we're essentially jumping into the beginning of this recommended mobility network phase and preparing to begin modeling our recommended network this summer. Oh, bear with me, there we go. So these are our existing needs identified in our existing conditions analysis for transit. In terms of transit speeds during peak periods, congestion occurs along Washington Street and University Avenue, affecting bus on-time performance and reliability. There's also several collisions involving pedestrians and cyclists near bus stops along University Avenue, 6th Avenue, and Washington, with higher ridership at bus stops located along University Avenue and Park Boulevard. So the collisions you can see are kind of these little orange, little starburst locations, and then the blue dots signify where we have bus stops with higher ridership. And this is essentially 300 or greater than 300 daily boardings and alightings. So for pedestrians, we have higher concentrations of pedestrians along University Avenue, 4th and 5th Avenue and on Washington Street near 4th Avenue. We also have higher pedestrian involved collisions along a lot of these roadways where there's higher concentrations of pedestrians. And you can see those here with the purple dots being the higher pedestrian volumes, and then the little starbursts are the symbols we use for collisions in all of our maps. So for cycling, there was higher bicycle demand and volumes observed along University Avenue, as well as on 4th and 5th Avenue. And very similar to the pedestrian needs, we observed higher cyclist involved collisions along the same areas where we had the higher volumes of cyclists, with the exception being Robinson Avenue, this east-west roadway here, which had several high collision locations, but the volume of the cyclists weren't as high as the other roadways nearby. And for vehicles, congestions experienced along the western portion of Washington Street, as well as 5th and 6th Avenue and University Avenue. Robinson Avenue east of State Route 163 as well. And many of the collisions in the community involving vehicles occur along these major roadways, especially along Washington Street, University Avenue, and Park Boulevard. Also want to touch on existing commute patterns. Existing commute patterns help to explain the demand on the transportation system. As you can see, on a daily basis, there are a little more than 24,000 people commuting into Hillcrest, and a little over 3,900 people living in the community working outside. So that leaves a small percentage, 311 or 1.2% of workers in Hillcrest live and work in the community. So this means almost 99% of the people who work in Hillcrest are commuting from somewhere outside of the community. And it's important for the mobility system to have a better live-work balance and to shorten those commute distances to encourage travel by other modes in order to not overburden the transportation network during those commute periods. We also wanted to highlight the objectives for this plan: celebrating the legacy of the LGBTQ+ community, creating public spaces, strengthening connections, supporting local businesses, and addressing housing needs. A well-designed mobility system is integrated into all of these goals. And now I'll go ahead and let Monique go through the next group of slides to walk you through different alternatives and feasibility considerations.
Well, thank you, Claudia. Good evening, everyone. If you recall, we've shared 3 draft network options to the subcommittee last year. And these options were centered around university, as treatments to this very corridor will trickle down to influencing the functionality of many of the local streets and other thoroughfares in Hillcrest. So in the past few months, we've been reviewing and contemplating these options to identify significant flaws in order to ensure that we recommend the most appropriate networks to our community members, as well as for this focused plan amendment. So to refresh everyone's memory, option 1 is to establish University Avenue between 4th Avenue and Park Boulevard as a transit mall with a strong focus on transit and active transportation. So under this option, vehicular travel along University Avenue at this section would be prohibited. And option 2 is to convert 1 vehicle travel lane in each direction to transit-only lanes along University Avenue between 6th Avenue and Park Boulevard. And then the third option, which is a hybrid option, east of 9th Avenue, the recommendation is the same as option 2, with 2 transit lanes and 1 vehicle travel lane each direction. However, west of 9th Avenue, University and Robinson would become a one-way couplet. So I will go over these options in the following slides. Note that I'll be focusing more on vehicular and bicycle travel. And since the recommendations to pedestrian and transit networks are very similar among the 3 options, and Claudia will be taking back and share those recommendations later on. Next slide. So let's take a quick look about option 1. So here is a look at the draft vehicular network under option 1. It is largely similar to what is out there today, with a few exceptions which are highlighted on the following slide. 6th Avenue south of University Avenue will be converted from the current 4 travel lanes to 2 travel lanes with 2 transit-only lanes. And this is really to accommodate the planned light rail or streetcar by Sandag and RTP. And this proposal is consistent among all 3 options. So I wouldn't be repeating this later on when I talk about the other options. The next one to look at is Washington Street east of 9th Avenue. And this road currently has 5 or 6 travel lanes along this section. The plan here is to reduce this section of the roadway to 4 travel lanes and utilize that space for other purposes, such as improved walking and biking environment. And this proposal is also consistent among the 3 options. Lastly, as you can see here, the red highlighted section of University Avenue will be a transit and active transportation focused corridor. Vehicular travel will be restricted. Now, this picture here that you can see reflects the potential cross-section. This proposal is unique to option number 1. Next slide, please. So here's the draft bicycle network under this option, and the 4th and 5th Avenue cycle tracks have been constructed and in operations, and I hope many of you have experienced it and riding it and using it. But a few other cycle tracks and multi-use path promenades are also proposed under this option, as showing here on this map in pink, purple, and orange. Pink color represents the one-way cycle track, while purple represents 2-way. Orange is for the normal street promenade. It is important to note that some of these facilities are proposed under all 3 options, and these include the normal street promenade in orange, the one-way cycle tracks along Park Boulevard between El Cajon Boulevard and Robinson Avenue, as well as Washington Street between Cleveland and Park Boulevard. And then the 2-way cycle track you see in purple on Lewis Street and 4th Avenue are also consistent among the 3 options. And this recommendation improves the connectivity between Hillcrest and Mission Valley, which is identified as a regional regional bike corridor in the regional bike plan. Something unique to this option is that with prohibiting vehicular travel on University, we were able to plan for one-way cycle tracks along University between 4th and Park Boulevard. Next slide. Now let's talk about some of the significant issues associated with closing University Avenue to vehicular travel. First, it eliminates access to and from University for the fire station number 5, which is located on 9th Avenue, just north of University, as shown here in the red star. By closing University, it also eliminates freeway access from University Avenue at 6th Avenue. Claudia, if you could point to that. And we're also likely to increase congestion or add additional congestion to other freeway ramps like Washington Street, 9th and 10th Avenue, also as shown here in the red stars. This option will also likely increase traffic on other streets, including residential streets, since cars would have to maneuver, detour away from University Avenue. And the red stars here are just a representation of a few roads that could be receiving additional traffic. And another observation we saw is that there are quite a few north-south streets along University Avenue that don't align perfectly, such as the normal streets on Herbert Street. Closing University Avenue will certainly create some difficulties for traffic to circulate and also accessing, from one end of University to the other side at these locations. And the same challenge would be true for T intersections, such as University and 9th Avenue intersection. And lastly, this option could affect business operations, as some businesses today are relying on University Avenue for loading, unloading, and other delivery services. Next slide. So here is a kind of an overview of a compilation of the challenges and issues we're seeing associated with option number 1. And now let's move on to option number 2. Next slide, please. And here's the, here is the draft vehicular network for option 2. Next slide. One thing that I want to point out, or I want to draw your attention to, is the conversion of the one vehicular travel lane each direction to transit-only lanes along University Avenue between 6th and Park. And this picture here shows the potential cross-section. As you can see, we got cycle tracks, we got on-street parking, we got one lane travel each direction, and we got the transit-only lanes. Next slide. And here's the drive bicycle network for option 2. And I'll point out some issues with this proposal on the next couple slides. And first, on the slide, the red bands here highlight the lack of connectivity or continuous quality bicycle facilities along 2 of the most critical east-west corridors within Hillcrest, and that is University Avenue and Robinson. And the proposal can only accommodate class 3 bicycle routes, you know, those you see with sharrows painted on the roadways along University Avenue between 6th and 10th, and similarly, class 3 west of Vermont along Robinson Avenue. Next slide. Under this option, cycle tracks are proposed along Washington Street. However, it is important to note that Washington Street today and in the future will continue to remain as a high-speed, high-volume roadway. And that is certainly not an ideal environment for cyclists of all ages, abilities, and experiences. In addition, there are 3 uncontrolled freeway ramps, as you can see here in the red star, along Washington, which could cause potential safety challenges for cyclists as they have to maneuver on this high-speed, high-volume roadway across these uncontrolled locations. Next slide. And with option 2, University Avenue will remain as a 2-way street, 2-way roadway. But then with the planned transit and bicycle priority treatments, this corridor could be dealing with some potential traffic operational challenges along all of these intersections that are marked here in red star. And next slide. And here's the summary of some of the major challenges associated with option number 2. So to mitigate these access, circulation, safety, operational issues identified for options 1 and 2, the team here have developed and refined options 3 here as the recommended option moving forward. So under this recommended option, east of 9th Avenue, the proposal is the same as option 2, as I mentioned earlier. The west of 9th Avenue, University and Robinson would become one-way couplet with University traveling westbound and Washington going eastbound. And this is not a new treatment in Hillcrest. It is very similar to the one-way streets you see and functions like 4th and 5th Avenue. Next slide.
Monique, I just wanted to add, you just said Washington, but I know you meant Robinson.
Oh, sorry. Yes, University and Robinson. Good correction. So here is a look at the recommended vehicular network. And go to the next slide. We can focus. As shown here, University and Robinson is a one-way couplet between 1st Avenue and 9th/10th Avenue. And it's going to stop on 9th on University, 10th on Robinson. Again, with University being westbound, Robinson being eastbound. And then let's take a look at some of the representative cross sections here. On the bottom left shows a potential cross section for Robinson Avenue. And you will see here 2 eastbound travel lanes with a dedicated bike lane. And it's also important to note that there's a contraflow bike lane with a stripe buffer that is presented going westbound. And then top left shows the university, so shows the cross section for University Avenue between 6th and 9th Avenue. And you will see exclusive transit lanes, a westbound vehicular travel lane, and one-way cycle tracks. And moving east on the top right, you see University Avenue with exclusive transit lanes, one lane travel in each direction, and on-street parking will be remained, and as well as one-way cycle tracks. Next slide. So here is the recommended bicycle network. As shown, cycle tracks are proposed on University Avenue, and Class 2 dedicated bike lanes are proposed along the entire stretch of Washington within Hillcrest. So with that, I will turn the presentation back to Claudia, and she will walk you through and provide some discussions on the recommended transit and pedestrian networks. Thank you, Claudia.
Just one more clarification. Again, Monique, you had said Washington, but it's Robinson.
Darn it. Thank you. Darn it.
It's Class 2 facility along Robinson Avenue, and then
yes.
the Class 4 along University Avenue.
Thank you. Thank you. I apologize.
No worries. So really what we're here to show you today are that last option is really kind of what we're recommending today. So Monique had touched on the vehicular and the bike, and so now I'll go through the recommended transit network that's meant to complement those two recommended networks for the other modes, as well as the pedestrian. So building off of Sandag's proposed transit investments to the area, such as the commuter rail line that you see here in this dark purple, planned light rail up along 6th Avenue, University and Park, and then all of these green lines symbolizing or identifying planned bus rapid transit in our regional plans. We've prepared recommendations in light of these improvements in order to make sure that transit's successful and that it's a viable option for those commuting to and from this community. So we're recommending dedicated transit lanes to accommodate existing and future transit along 6th Avenue, University Avenue, and Park Boulevard. And you saw that a lot of the cross sections had already shown that center median area kind of taken up by transit. And so that's kind of what our recommendation is, to make sure that there's some dedicated space for transit, as well as a future streetcar that Sandag's identified in the regional plan. And so this light rail, this pink line you see here up 6th University and up Park Boulevard is meant to either be a light rail or a streetcar. Sandag hasn't quite figured out which of the two it is, but we're essentially saying, you know, we recommend providing or dedicating space for transit along this area, understanding the significance of having this type of higher frequency transit service in the community. And in addition to having it during peak periods, we're also recommending dedicated transit lanes along the western portion of Washington Street. And you can see that highlighted here. That's where our existing conditions analysis had previously indicated that congestion was negatively affecting transit travel through this area. And we have an example of kind of what that can look like during the peak periods. It would be curb space that would open up for transit to operate in each direction during the peak periods. For pedestrians, we've identified linear parks that can provide a better pedestrian environment along the west side of Washington Street. And so those are outlined in green lines here. So we have Washington Street, also along portions of University Avenue on the east side of the community and along Normal Street. Also along several of the major streets in the community where pedestrians get around, we have recommended what we call urban corridor improvements, which include wider sidewalks with street trees and activated frontage zones. We've also shared in the past that we recommend specific intersection crossing treatments like continental crosswalks with advanced stop bars and lead pedestrian intervals to make pedestrians more visible as they cross the street. And in some areas, we will look at restricting right turning traffic on red lights where we have right turning traffic conflicting with large volumes of pedestrians. Other pedestrian types of amenities will be provided through redevelopment and will be shared at a later time when discussing urban design for the community. Let me change. So to highlight some of the advantages of our refined or recommended mobility network, we feel that the recommended network we presented to you today provides transit priority along several community roadways, especially Washington Street and University Avenue. The one-way couplet along University and Robinson Avenue improves operations and safety, especially at intersections, and it also increases roadway capacity to better accommodate future growth. Emergency access is very important, and our recommended network maintains access to and from Fire Station 5 so that emergency vehicles can respond to and address fires and other emergencies quickly and around the community. The refined network also provides continuous bikeways on several major roadways, both east, west, and north and south, to get to destinations throughout the community via a bicycle and also connecting to regional bikeways nearby. We feel that this is the best solution based on all the challenges for the different corridors. This refined network also aligns with what were the preferred options in the online community engagement platform. The online community engagement platform shows their support for this strategy in addition to our professional input. And our recommended mobility network as a whole addresses many of the comments we've received as it improves and prioritizes bicycle and public transit, in addition to including streetscape improvements for pedestrians and preserving curb space, which some may see as parking, but really it's so much more than parking because curb space provides space not just for parking vehicles, but for business operations like loading and unloading goods, for outdoor dining opportunities. It provides accessibility, which is important for people getting picked up and dropped off, especially for those with disabilities that aren't able to walk as far. And I also want to mention that coordination is very important. In addition to sharing this information with you all and getting input from this group, it's also important that we coordinate with our other stakeholders like UCSD and Scripps Hospital, as well as our community parking district, Sandag, Caltrans, MTS, and other city departments. We've met with many of them to clear that these solutions will work for all of the affected parties. The decision hasn't been made, but we are making sure to coordinate with them along the process just to make sure we're not putting out solutions that won't work. And then part of the recommended network that wasn't shown in those 4 network maps today also includes mobility hubs. And mobility hubs are places of connectivity where different travel options like walking, biking, transit, and shared mobility devices come together. They provide an integrative suite of mobility services and amenities and supporting technologies to better connect higher frequency transit to an individual's origin of destination. Mobility hubs come in all sizes and provide many different features. It can be as big as a major transfer point for, for example, the commuter rail or light rail, and then have features for first and last mile connections like shuttles, car share, scooter share, and bicycles. But it can also be a smaller area near transit with fewer amenities nearby, just to ensure that you can continue to your destination and kind of complete that trip. A good example of something similar to when I had mentioned kind of the shuttles, good example of that is the Hillcrest Lunch Shuttle and all of the recent scooter corrals that we've been strategically placing throughout the community. Those are good examples of, this is one location, maybe it's next to a bus stop where you get off of the bus and then you hop on a scooter and continue on your way to your final destination point. And then one other thing that I also wanted to touch on that's also not in those 4 network maps that I had provided is, touching on parking technologies, parking management, and really that park once concept. That park once concept is also very much in line with mobility hubs. So Hillcrest itself is and will continue to be a very walkable community. So it makes it easier for people to park in one location and walk and bike to their final destination. And features like a centrally located parking area or a community circulator shuttle like the one that currently operates during lunchtime, can help get people to their destinations without having several vehicles circling around. And I know these slides are typically shared by Shannon, but I wanted to just kind of give an overall timeline for the Plan Hillcrest. So we're in the concept development phase right now. We aim to have a first draft of the amendment this fall. The environmental review process is planned to occur later this year and also into early 2023. And so that's this blue bar right here. And then we plan to head through the public hearing process in 2023 for amendment approval. Taking a look at the upcoming months, in July, we're going to be taking a month off from meetings. August 18th, we will present refined land use concepts and supplemental development regulations. And in September, we plan to present both mobility and land use to the broader Uptown planners. We aim to reconcile all community feedback we have received from all of the engagement efforts and present our recommended mobility network and land use concepts to Planning Commission in a workshop also in September. And with that, that concludes our presentation. And now we can take any comments or questions from the group. Roy?
All right, thank you. Lots to absorb. All right, so our procedures is we'll first take non-board member comments. The board members should be listening to these comments and reflect them in their comments. So Nevo, you're first.
Thanks, Roy. So I wanted to say that I really like how staff, kind of distilled these three major options and considered some of the issues and kind of came up with this recommended plan, especially the transit and bicycle network. I really like a lot of them. I will say that it seems that one of the challenges, to making University Avenue more of a active transportation / transit / potentially restaurant space, linear park idea is really that fire truck access. And I'm curious if there's been any analysis on emergency response times particularly in transit corridors, considering there's many examples in the US and around the world where some very busy commercial corridors are transit only, and emergency access is obviously required. And so I'm kind of curious on how perhaps a transit lane can improve that, because there's no congestion with many cars. Bus drivers can pull over. I'd be really interested in seeing if that can help kind of factor into the equation, because I'd really like to see us kind of use that space to maximize how many people can really enjoy it and take advantage of it. With regards to the bike network, I really like the recommended bike network. I like to throw in the asterisk that class 3 bike facilities don't actually do anything. They're kind of just there as a filler. I like how you kind of minimize that light green, but I think we should all acknowledge that bike sharers don't actually do anything. And of course, I like the transit network and the pedestrian network as well. And I appreciate staff's work on this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Jay, you're next.
Thank you, Roy. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate all the work you put into it. I agree with Nevo in that I think I like the idea of option 3. I do have some concerns with taking Robinson, which is a neighborhood street, and then making it into a collector. I think if you do that, we really need to consider closing the off-ramp onto the on-ramp onto the 163. I think there's a lot of through traffic through South Mission Hills into Western Hillcrest through that off-ramp. I think closing that would alleviate a lot of the traffic and make it a lot safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. I'm concerned that we're going to be dumping a ton of cars. I own a house in South Mission Hills off of West University, and during rush hour, the traffic on West University gets very backed up, and would be concerned for my neighbors on Robinson Street and Hillcrest who would have to deal with that, who would not expect that. So if nothing else, I think a big outreach would need to be made if we're going to be doing this. And then second, I think it's really important that the bike lane, if we can make that class 2 between Albatross and First into a class 4, that would be really helpful. I ride with my kids every weekend, and West University Avenue is one of the most dangerous parts of my commute, and also our bike rides, just because there is no bicycle facilities and there's a lot of parked cars and people are not paying attention and they speed and they drive very fast. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill.
Thank you, Roy. Thanks for the presentation. I want to piggyback on some of the things that have been said already, particularly first of all, I like that you have shown more effort on the Washington Street side from the 163 to Park Boulevard. We haven't seen that in the past, and I'm thankful that you're at least beginning to look at that. I do disagree with some of the bicycle networking, being an avid cyclist, showing that one of the major elements is going up Cleveland into University Heights, of which I am a resident. That is not the way bicycles travel. They come across the Vermont Street Bridge into the Hub shopping center and then proceed. So I think that needs to be reworked. The Washington Street from the 163 all the way to Park, I'm glad to see some work is being done, but I think a lot more needs to be done for both a pedestrian and a bicycle. I mean, when I go over into Central Hillcrest to the medical area, I have to go down to Washington because, or down to University, because Washington is just not safe at all. Another element is I think you should explore extending the linear park along Normal Street, not just going up to Polk, but having the linear park go all the way to Park Boulevard. And speaking of Park Boulevard and El Cajon and Normal Street and Campus, those are two intersections which are ripe for opportunity for reconfiguration of one kind or another, particularly since the transit hub is going to be at Park and El Cajon. It's a major intersection with a lot of problems. I have heard zero feedback as to how that element can be improved. So thank you very much for the presentation. I look forward to seeing some improvements in the future.
And Roy, if I can just maybe share my screen. I did have one slide that we didn't quite present, but wanted to let the community know it is kind of in the works. Let me just share my screen really quick. It's the intersection that you had mentioned, Bill, of Park Boulevard, Normal, and El Cajon. We're evaluating it for a roundabout at this time. It was a request by a community member, and we're looking at a concept that accommodates the transit. So the right turning transit that goes up Park Boulevard and east on El Cajon Boulevard, and then making sure that we can fit that in with appropriate pedestrian and bicycle improvements as well. And so that is in the works. We just haven't fully fleshed out the details, which is why we didn't really have a concept to share with you guys today. But just for what it's worth, I wanted to let you know that there's kind of some stuff still going on in the background as we further kind of analyze some of these things. We'll start to kind of build up our mobility improvements.
So thank you. Once again, just down at the campus, one block sort of southwestish. I think it's like five streets coming together. They're not perpendicular. I think there's another opportunity for reconfiguration at that intersection as well. So thank you.
Great, thanks.
All right. So, and we'll hold the rest of the city's comments till after everybody has spoken.
Sorry.
I understand why you wanted to throw that out there. Oscar.
Yes, I just want to say thank you to city staff for presenting this outline for the future. I think it's very thoughtful and definitely took in a lot of the input from the community, both in person as well as the online surveys that were sent out. I definitely appreciate the high priority on the bike lanes, on public transit, on prioritizing, make sure that there's different mobility methods for able-bodied and people that have disabilities as well. I think it's very considerate of everyone. I think to the points that were brought up earlier, that the sharrows are not really helpful at all. I think being a cyclist and a driver that goes on University, the sharrows are just not respected at all. If there's people that don't give you the space, they will not. For me, myself, I'm a able-bodied cyclist. I don't have a concern, but I'm definitely worried about, for example, my partner that does not enjoy riding in the streets because he feels unsafe, or even families or mothers or anybody else who's just newer to riding doesn't feel welcome in that area. So definitely prioritizing the more separated bike lanes, and definitely going down through University, Robinson, and making sure that Washington is safe. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Ian, you're up.
Thanks. Great presentation, by the way. It's really informative. So having served on the board, one of the big concerns was that it sounds like you folks have put Washington Street out of play, only because we get this pass-through traffic historically from people trying to get off of I-5 and go through points west to east neighborhoods. And between 4:30, I've actually done a video of it. It's just crazy for pedestrians, for biking. So it doesn't sound like the city wants to do anything to do anything with the traffic on that between those hours. Plus you're getting the UCSD buses coming from Thornton. It's a mess. So the idea that you're going to do this, have one lane in each direction has to be the direction. There has to be some pain to people with an auto-centric society that we live in. There has to be some pain along University. So I really like that hybrid on University, and the same can be on Robinson. I take Jay's points. That it's more of a residential and not a collector. University is a collector, but can be a smart collector. And so I think using that idea of one direction each way, especially the one way west of First or west of Fifth, I think it is huge. It's got to be the last mile concept in planning, and we can't have it devoted to pass through traffic from I-5. The second point is we really have to, if we're going to look towards the future, we have to look towards shared parking. We had Car2Go, and it was I don't know why it went away. I'm sure there's reasons beyond my understanding, but the shared cars and parking ramps is just going to reduce the amount of cars. It can be electric. If you have to go up to LA, you sign up advance for the. I just can't imagine that. The paradigms that people are still poo-pooing. They want more and more cars. We're looking towards the future. The adults in a room now have screwed everything up transportation-wise. This is for the kids. This is for the future. We don't want to be called, we're trying to fix the sins of the planning sins of the fathers. So I hope you take the shared car in parking ramps seriously. And thank you very much. Good presentation.
All right, thanks. Sharon.
Hello. Okay, couple of a lot of information is in this presentation. Thank you. I'd like to I have a few questions to help me understand what's being shown. You talked about dedicated spaces for light rail or future light rail or streetcar. How are you illustrating those dedicated spaces? When you show a bus and a trolley next to each other, are you suggesting that right now there'd be a bus going each direction, and in the future there might be a trolley going each direction, or that there would be a bus and a trolley on the street? So that should be explained clearer when you give the presentation next time. And also, you talk a lot. You talk about the class 1, class 2, class 3 bike lanes, but for people who are new to this, you should show examples of what you mean by class one, what a class one is, what a class two is, and class three. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Matt Stewart. You're on mute.
I do that every time. Thank you to the city for the presentation. It was really informative. I really like the, focus on transit and bike lanes and, pedestrian safe places. I live in Hillcrest and I bike on, Robinson University all the time. And as others said, the Sharrows don't do anything. And I really don't think they should be included on bike network maps. If you ride in the middle of the street, drivers get mad at you, but then inexperienced cyclists will be to the right side, right in the door zone of cars. And I just am waiting for someone to, open a door and that cyclist to go down. So I think we need to have, better protection on our bike lanes. And also, I didn't see any real bike lanes west of I think Albatross or First or something. And there's no real good connections west into Mission Hills and down into down the hill, and then also north to Bachman. I saw some Sharrows and with, there's a Bachman bike lane, I think, coming with Sandag, and one down Washington, and then also east towards Park. There's just no real good east-west bike connections along the whole way. And I bike all the time and it's not fun being with the cars. So that's the one thing. And then I was similar to, I think, a couple other comments. I was curious how it would, fire would have no access if University was a transit lane, because if there's no cars there, if it's only buses or, a wide bike lane, I would think they would have room. So I'm curious how that works. But I do agree that, delivery access is important for businesses. So, we could still have a transit way and maybe, deliveries could have a way to still get access onto that street. Anything else? Oh, I was also wondering why on Washington, there was the bus lane only for, high capacity or, busy times. I would think that if, the street is able to work when it's at its busiest, then it should just be a bus lane all the time. Because, I see buses get stuck in traffic on Washington on University, and, transit riders should, not get stuck in traffic when they choose, the more sustainable option. So I think that's all I have. Thank you again.
Hey, Carol, you're up.
Yes, thank you. I have a question about the commuter rail. That dark line on that one particular chart goes directly west along University and then through Florence Canyon. The line is not shown as going up and making that little jog west along University Avenue. And I just wanted some clarification on the route of that commuter rail. Thank you.
Okay, now hold all those, Claudia.
Okay.
Hold it till save. We're going to do all at once at the end,
Will do.
in between the public comments and the board comments.
Okay.
All right, Tom.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'm glad that staff made a list of the pros and cons with option one. I think option one has many drawbacks, and such as blocking the fire station, blocking deliveries to merchants. And I think many of us from the start thought it was not going to be practical to close all the travel lanes on University. The city's own studies have shown that it would create big problems. The studies that were done several years ago. I'm surprised going to the Planning Commission in September. It would obviously have to be fairly conceptual. I don't think any conclusions have been reached. So again, I'm surprised with that. I think that this group, and I'd like to ask Roy to schedule 1 or 2 meetings fairly soon for us to digest all this. I think we have to go over some of these slides more closely, really understand the couplet and some of these other things. I'd like to understand Washington Street, that shared switchable lane for the bus, how that would work. So I do think we need time to digest it. Then I think that the subcommittee should make some kind of recommendations to Uptown Planners and take this to Uptown Planners. I think we're getting close to the time when we need to do that. Lastly, I'm definitely anxious to see traffic studies, and I'd also like to find out when the environmental report is coming. Thank you.
Thanks. Joel.
Hello, yeah, I share Bill's concern about what's being done on Washington or how little's being done. I live in Serra Mesa. I've traveled down Washington by bike and walking. I go to medical facilities up there, and Washington needs a lot of work. It's very dangerous to walk or bike on it right now. Also, Bachman, I thought that was strange that we show Sharrow's proposed on it. It needs bike lanes. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Any other public comments? Oh, we got a couple more. Keola?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kayla. Thank you all for being here, for putting this together, and for spending time with us today. When I think about the way that I want to move in my community in the future, I would say that option 1 is most closely aligned to that vision, which prioritizes bike safety, pedestrian safety, and transit access. Though I do recognize there are a lot of considerations, and I think that looking into solutions for emergency vehicle access as well as access for deliveries and making sure that our businesses that are in the neighborhood thrive is a great way to move forward. So thank you.
All right, thanks. Any other before I have the city respond to all the comments? All right, we'll cut off that part of the debate, and I'll like the city respond to the different comments that were made.
Okay. All right, so since I have the slide already up, I'm going to touch on the comment with regards to commuter rail. And that's these, I'm sharing my screen, right? Okay. That's these dark purple bluish lines. So these are planned transit improvements in Sandag's 2021 regional plan. And so we're putting them in here, this as well as the light rail and the green bus rapid transit is what is seen as a regional transit investment. It's not what we've identified as part of this this focused plan amendment. We're basically saying we understand that the region has this desire to implement these commuter rails as these quick transfer points. Right now, we've had communications with their transit planning staff, and they've said, you know, it's very high level. You do see lines going through canyons and lines jutting west to University, but it's essentially just saying we need to connect this area to this other area. The line traveling west is supposed to symbolize a connection between this Hillcrest community to the Central Mobility Hub. That's also further being studied by Sandag as well. And then this line across the canyon is, again, it's just saying we need to make sure that we find some connection from this general area to this general area, and then what else it's connecting to. It connects further north to Kearny Mesa and other employment areas, and then it connects further east to La Mesa and San Diego State. So that's not necessarily our proposal. We're just showing it so that you get the bigger picture of all of the transit improvements or investments that are going to be made.
So are you saying those are underground?
They could be underground or elevated, but I don't even think Sandag knows just yet exactly how it's going to be and what the alignment's going to be. What I keep getting from them is it's very high level, and once they start getting down to a kind of more of a street level or kind of a community level, then they can start understanding what that alignment will look like and whether it's going to be above ground or underground. And I don't know off the top of my head, I apologize, but if you look at the 2021 regional plan, a lot of these commuter rails are planned for further out in the future, 2035 and even 2050. And some of these bus rapid transit and the light rail, those are planned for shorter horizon years in the regional plan. And so that was one question. The other question was, or I guess Tom Mullaney had brought up the surprise with Planning Commission, with it going to the Planning Commission workshop. I just wanted to let you guys know. So the Planning Commission workshop is more like an information item. It's very similar to this, to gather feedback. They're not going to be making a recommendation. It's just our way of making sure that we're keeping them apprised of, changes that are made throughout the process. When we get to the hearing process is when we will go to them with as like an action item where we're seeking recommendation. But this September meeting is just supposed to be information and information gathering on our end.
Another question was showing the bus and the trolley. Are they both using the same, or is it one or the other? What is the situation there?
That was the thing. So our concepts show them both because it's very much in flux. We're not sure, at least for the light rail, Sandag has told us it could be a streetcar, which is, rubber wheeled, or it could be light rail. Again, they've stated it's very high level. When they get down to actually looking at how they would implement it is where they would kind of make that determination of whether it would be light rail or rubber wheeled streetcar. And so for that reason, we just thought it would be best to show both. But basically the general idea is we're recommending to provide dedicated space for this higher frequency transit in this area, on these corridors.
Well, so currently there's a bunch of different buses that use that section. In fact, anything going east-west has to use that section. How does that coordinate with what you're showing?
Yeah, so all of the transit would use the center running. From what we're showing, it would be center running is kind of how we feel like it would be working. To be honest, if it's light rail, it might make it a little more difficult for us to try and accommodate rail and have transit operations in the same area. So we've been communicating with Sandag, and they've said, it could very well be a streetcar, which wouldn't have any of those conflicts.
So you'd have buses and streetcars on the same section, you're saying?
Correct.
Okay. Did we miss another question? I think that.
Yeah, I can help to address a few questions.
Oh, sure.
Claudia, if Roy, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to talk about Robinson. If I can take over the screen share, I think Jay, I don't think I explained well what Robinson is truly look like. So can Shannon, can you give me, grant me screen share? So I can kind of walk Jay and others through the vision for Robinson.
Monique, you should be able to share your screen.
Oh, great, thank you. All right, I got Google Earth open. So on the figure I showed, and then when I talked about when I keep on calling Robinson, Washington, is that we're converting Robinson, we're proposing to convert Robinson from 1st to the 10th as a one-way eastbound travel. Right now, as you can see, is two lanes plus in certain areas with two-way left turn lane. And much of the land use is west of the freeway. Is not residential, it's commercial supporting. So that's why we felt like it can, a little bit more capacity for the road could help to handle the traffic and support the flow. Now, imagine there's 2 lanes traveling. Can you all see my hand here? 2 lanes traveling on Robinson going eastbound. Once you hit the freeway here, one of the lanes gonna peel off onto the freeway ramp. And the other lane's gonna go through. I'm gonna turn this off. Okay. Oh, here, sorry. And the other lane's gonna go through here. As you can see, this bridge is very narrow. So the cross section on this bridge will be 1 travel lane going through with a bike lane, with a contraflow buffer bike lane. And then once they get to this side where the traffic, the off-ramp comes down, you're going to go back to original operations. We're not proposing to touch anything east of this area. So really the configuration change happens on the west as 2 lanes, and once they get to the freeway on-ramp, one of the 2 lanes is going to peel off so that we can maintain class 2 bike length in both directions over the bridge. So that's one explanation. I don't know if that helps address some concerns about potentially added traffic onto Robinson and to kind of disrupt the neighborhood of functionality of the Robinson Street. Jay, I see your hands up.
Yeah, so my concern is actually west of that. So
Okay.
because essentially when University turns into a one-way at first, all of that traffic that's on West University now that's heading. So what happens in the afternoons is people, the 163 gets backed up on I-5 heading from downtown, and it'll get really long lines. So people will bypass that. Some of them will go on to take that exit onto 6. Some of them will go all the way down to the Washington Street exit on 5, head up onto West University, and then take West University through Mission Hills and then through Hillcrest, and then get back up onto the 163 at 6th Avenue. And it's a really dangerous intersection because you have cars turning right and turning left, and then also cars trying to jog onto that 5th area over there. And because there's just so many cars trying to do that, and a lot of cars are using that western section of University as a cut through, I think that traffic is going to get shunted onto Robinson. I really think you should look at either closing the ramp or maybe look at making a one-way making between Dove and Albatross a one-way only going west to keep cars from making that basically to keep people from out of the neighborhood to using the Mission Hills and Western Hillcrest as a cut through.
So Jay, you
I think
said
otherwise what's going to end up
from
happening
Dove?
is Robinson's going to get slammed with traffic because Caltrans has a bad intersection on I-5 South.
So Jay, you're recommending from Dove to Albatross, westbound only? We can look at that for sure. Westbound only?
Yes.
Okay, we'll take a look at, I'm taking notes here. Thank you for the recommendation, and thank you for the explanation too.
Okay, thank you.
And then another point I was going to bring up is the fact that, let me pull up the class 3 Shero on Bachman. Let me just kind of go down here. So I would drag this. Can you see 2 screens or no? You can only see the presentation?
We just see recommended bicycle network.
Okay, so that doesn't work. Okay. One of the things I was going to point out is that we did have a little modification or adjustments of Lewis and 4th Avenue, because right now, if you see on the Uptown Bikeway, it actually comes down to 3rd Avenue and then continues. But what we're proposing is to have Lewis and 4th Avenue to have the 2-way cycle track on the north side and also on the east side. Then they transition directly into the southbound southbound cycle track. And then on the northbound, it would just come up from 5th Avenue and merge into the 4th Avenue 2-way cycle track north of Washington. So provide a little bit more protection and connectivity around a pretty busy area with quite a bit of a hospital or medical office traffic. And then one of the things I was going to also point out on that network is that I think there's a little bit error here. We on this section, there were a lot of right-of-way constraints. So we are following the Uptown Bikeway. So the blue you see here really should have been continued down right at this curve and to match the Uptown Bikeway. So the only the green section you see is where, you know, I don't believe there's room to fit in the class 2. And I also think that's downhill travel. So that's why on the uphill, we're still putting the bike lane to the extent possible. And the downhill that we're putting the class 3, which is consistent for the Uptown Urban Bikeway. And this is a section I was talking about to provide a better connection to into the existing cycle tracks. That's all I got.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let me turn to the board now and get some board comments. Who would like to go first? Matt, you're up.
Okay, just of all the comments I can make, I'll just limit it to 3. First, if you take away nothing else, the city needs to recognize that it's false to claim any plan as prioritizing people over cars. It's people who are transported by cars, drive them, use them. So it's the only purpose of this talking point is to intentionally sow division and score points with a certain segment, and it needs to be stopped. The second would be despite all the admissions, criticism of the Maptionnaire as being non-scientific and not controlled for either bias or participation. Excuse me.
She's on mute. Go ahead.
Okay, as being non-scientific and not controlled for bias or participation, and that its results were simply going to be considered as anecdotal, we're seeing, again, as we had criticized about this before, anticipated, that we're seeing that instead they're being used to justify the predetermined options. This reliance on these flawed processes actually leads to a general mistrust of the entire process. And finally, we still have not been provided anything to justify Sandag's massive about face last December about the trolley light rail alignment going from downtown up Park to El Cajon to now being 6th across University Park instead. I mean, that was proposed for years and years and years. Then all of a sudden, we still don't know why they changed their mind at the last minute. And all 3 options not only plan for what appears to be based on a whim, but this designing around a concept and infrastructure, the funding for which is far from certain, would prohibit other options when it doesn't appear. So we need to find out more about where the reasoning is coming from this. That this is actually the alignment that makes the most sense, rather than just keep going along and thinking, pretending that, it's great. We've always been at war with Oceania. So, it's very, very troubling. And we really need to hear more justifying this rather than just going along before we go another 5 years down the road and all of a sudden they want the trolley and light rail to go down Washington Street instead. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Matt. Other board members want to weigh in. Go ahead, Brer.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for this presentation. There is a lot of information in here, and it's kind of impossible at this point to comment on it all. So I'll try and be general in some of these and hit what I think are the important points. The option 1, I have always felt was a aspirational design idea that was looking forward to what the neighborhood could be. Yes, you've pointed out immediate obstacles to realizing it, but the point of a plan is to set goals and then figure out ways to solve them. They don't all need to be solved right now. Particularly the issue about the fire station. Fire trucks can ride in bus lanes. The fire station can also be accommodated with routes across a pedestrian or non-car street. I don't really understand why that would be seen as an issue. So thinking about that, I think that, picking option 3 is really kind of catering to what our needs are now and not really what's going to be happening in the future. Our climate action plan and future mobility plans all sort of outline this other reality, which is moving away from private automobile use as a way to cut our GHG emissions. So with that, I'll make a couple comments on option 3. I'm just going to pull up a map so I can look at it. So I've always had issues with the one-way couplets. I think that their primary function is to increase traffic flow. And as I've said before, I think focusing on traffic flow in the neighborhood is not the way to create a neighborhood that works best for all users. There's the issue of Washington Street, which appears to be completely excluded from the network for anyone outside of a car, which I find baffling because there are so many uses on Washington Street that people might want to access. You seem to have acknowledged that this street would be good for people to access by creating a pedestrian way, enhanced pedestrian way along one side of the street, but you don't see the need to include people who want to use active transportation or other modes. And I find that really confusing and kind of exclusionary of people who happen to live north of Washington Street, or maybe coming up Bachman and wanting to travel west if they're on a bicycle or some other form of micromobility. So I would say that Washington Street, in my opinion, is a complete fail. It's been a literal curse for the neighborhood for years. And in this plan, it's not setting any goals to make it better, other than a enhanced pedestrian way that goes by the library, but happens to exclude bicycles. I think that the proposed transit configuration for East University is acceptable in the near term. It doesn't seem aspirational. It seems to accommodate suggested transit as planned by Sandag, but it's not really doing much to really push the neighborhood forward to be a truly pedestrian oriented or even plaza based type community. You know, we've seen so many improvements around the city with streets being reduced and closed to pedestrian or closed for pedestrians, and creating this kind of plaza walkable shopping oriented district. And the recommended option you're suggesting here just sort of takes that off the table, which I find really disappointing. Referring to the traffic flow, again, you know, we've got a lot of terrible on and off ramps from the 163. This doesn't set any goals with how to deal with those, which I find really disappointing. There's no reason that some of the bad on ramps, like the one off of University, just south of University on 10th, should remain open. It's substandard in every way, and it regularly causes near misses and accidents. The two coming off of Robinson are also arguably troublesome on and off ramps. Your one-way couplet might solve some of those problems. I'll give you that, but also the freeway off ramp coming up through 6 at University, a terrible high flow intersection. And, you know, I don't really see any solution in what you're proposing here to try and mitigate that. So all of the freeway issues in the neighborhood aren't being addressed, and that's a really big disappointment. So connections between neighborhoods, there seems to be, you're showing bike lanes heading towards University Heights, which is great. We've got the new Park Boulevard bike facility, which is great, but there's nothing connecting to Mission Hills. And so I guess the assumption is that anyone wanting to go to and from Mission Hills has to sort of brave the gauntlet on an unprotected Washington Street, or use some sort of shared facility heading down West University. So I think that's a big hole in your plan here. Connecting neighborhoods should be a priority, and making sure that residents, no matter which part of Hillcrest they live in, can get to and fro and around without a car if they choose to. So I think I'll leave it at that. I see a lot of good things here. And in conclusion, I'll just say that I would encourage you to be more aspirational. If you don't show anything on this plan for Washington Street, no one will take it into account when doing other future plans or engineering. So including even some sort of minimal facility for active transportation and other users other than cars, I think should be a requirement. Thanks.
Thanks, Bear. Lou, you're up.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. As has been noted, there is a lot, and there's a lot to respond to, and some important points have already been made. So I will say a few things about the proposal that you, the plan that you're recommending, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about the process issues of how we address Plan Hillcrest and this mobility aspect of it.
Hello?
So I'm not sure what the interruptions are. I know it happened when Matt Wallstrom spoke as well, but if there's anything you can do to control the interruptions, I'd appreciate it. I wanted to say that I just echo some of the things that have been said about issues with Washington Street and also the connections with Park Boulevard that need to be addressed. I'm sorry, I have a alarm going off. I want to turn it off. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about that. And also about the questions about the traffic on Robinson, especially where it's narrowing over the freeway. I think that I think that any time that you're asking people, and it happens multiple times during this plan that you have, where you're saying it's going to be one way and then we'll switch. We'll go from concrete bike lanes to sharrows. We'll go from 2 lanes to 1 lane, that you end up with problems and potential collisions because drivers and cyclists and pedestrians get confused about what's happening traffic wise. So the extent that you can plan for a consistent line of action that everyone can rely on. I noticed it in the changes to Park Boulevard now, that because it switches what lane does what and goes where, and you have to keep angling around when you're driving, and the same is true if you're not as much with cycling, but definitely with walking, to try to figure out where you're supposed to be when, and also how when you're cycling, for where the doors are that you have to watch out for. It's problematic. So that's a general suggestion I could make. On the more process-oriented issues, I just want to point out that everything that has to do with transportation with Sandag is so speculative, and so is the stuff about centralized parking and shuttle options. And I'm really concerned we'll go ahead with changing the streets and putting in the bike lanes and, you know, changing the parking and the direction of traffic. And a lot of that happy stuff isn't going to come true, or isn't going to come true in 5 to 10 years. And so that's a real concern, that we're saying, you know, good stuff will make this better. We'll make it okay and make it feasible, but we don't have any real likelihood of that other good stuff happening. Also, I'm concerned there are big changes to the hospital. As has been mentioned, we need traffic studies, but because they're changing so much with the new hospital work changes, I don't know how valid current traffic studies will be unless they try to take into account what's going to change, especially on Washington Street with those new developments as well. I also wanted to beg that you talk to businesses that are on those arteries and other streets that are going to be directly affected in this Plan Hillcrest area. And by that, I don't mean say, well, we held a public meeting and they can show up if they want. I mean shoe leather. Go and talk to those businesses and show them these plans and ask them how they feel it's going to affect their businesses. I'm not that business person, but I know that other businesses with other changes that have happened in the city recently have felt blindsided and felt that they were their businesses were severely damaged in ways that perhaps the planners didn't take into account. I also want to back up the comments about connecting neighborhoods. Someone mentioned how the Vermont Street Bridge is used rather than Cleveland. Yeah, because we have a pedestrian bike and a pedestrian and bike bridge that doesn't have car traffic on it. And I don't see any planning for more of those kind of developments in here, which could also be combined with the kind of improvement for streetscape that you were talking about for pedestrians and cyclists with trees and pocket parks or whatever. Finally, on the issue of how we go about having a role, meaning Uptown Planners and the Plan Hillcrest, we definitely do need committee meetings of Plan Hillcrest that are not basically the city says it's a committee of Uptown Planners, but the city runs it, the city organizes it, the city sets the date for it, the city runs the presentation, and it's all about the city telling us what Plan Hillcrest options are, as opposed to us talking about what we want for Hillcrest Core. And also this scheduling that now there's going to be a special meeting of Uptown Planners in September. Maybe everyone know about that but me, but as a board member, I hadn't been advised about how that was happening because the city wants it to happen. And I think we need to look at opportunities to really explore these options in detail and also explore the options that aren't the ones the city comes up with. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the presentation.
Thanks, Lou. Since the city is not going to be ready for a presentation next month, it might give us an opportunity to meet in person if we can get a facility to do it. I'll have to work with Matt to ask if we want to get our normal meeting space. I have to go through you, Matt. They won't let subcommittee people reserve the space. So we could try for next month, maybe around our normal time period would be most likely when people be available. So it might be a good idea. So I have a lot of concerns. I wrote an email almost 6 months ago when I first saw some of these elements of the plan, and I did finally get a response back in February. My concern was more on what Sandag wants to do than what the city wants to do, to be quite honest. So Sandag all along had said that they were going to be running a trolley line down at Park Boulevard. And that was one of the reasons why the Uptown Planners endorsed higher density in the area by Park Boulevard in our plan update. We asked actually to transfer a lot of the density into that area because we felt like, okay, now you have a workable mass transit solution. And when I heard that they were diverting this direct downtown on Park Boulevard, which is one of the best ways to get downtown, which is one of the points that Sandag made when they sold us on taking away and putting special lanes on Park Boulevard, they made the argument that that was the best way to get downtown. And I bought into that, and it makes sense. And now why they're going to divert the transit off that and add extra time to the commute? Well, the answer that I got back was that this is a big loop and it goes all the way down to 30th Street. And if you take 30th Street through South Park and then cut over through, look at my map here, and you cut over through Logan Heights and then you get down that way, the argument was, well, people can get downtown quickly via that. But a lot of the density is being put on El Cajon Boulevard, and it doesn't seem like a good solution for those people. And the reason I say that is because transit is the key to any of this working. We have to be looking at where people live and where they go to work. Your initial slide said that we have a disaster. We don't have anybody working and living in the area, according to the slide. Now, Hillcrest is unique. It's the LGBT community. And so it attracts a lot of people, especially in the evenings, from all over. And so it has needs that are beyond that. Now, when the city studied, as Tom mentioned, losing a lane on University Avenue, and we wanted to do that as part of putting the bike lanes in and maintaining all the pedestrian enhancements. We asked the city and they agreed to study it. And we had everybody in agreement. The businesses, the whole community was like, okay, this is the way to go. And they came back and said, well, no, we can't do that. It would have too much of a negative impact on the traffic on University Avenue. That was what the city determined when they studied this. And that was under the current conditions, under the current density designs, and not under an increase. So my problem with this plan is I understand that for the last 50 years, since I was 15, I guess, we've focused on cars and car traffic, and that it's time to take into account bicyclists, as well as pedestrians. So the bicycles seem to have, I asked for pedestrian enhancements that were really basic years ago, and nothing's happened with those. But I'll put that aside. The turn away from the idea that if we make life miserable for people in cars, that somehow they're all going to get on a bicycle or walk or take transit. I don't see evidence for it, and I'd love for the city to provide us evidence. We need evidence that that happens, because I've seen plenty of evidence that hasn't happened. Now, that was before global warming and all these other issues. So I am willing to hear that younger people are willing to behave differently than people have behaved for the last 50 years. But I need to see evidence and need to see some things going on, because what you're proposing is a massive change. It's very inspirational, besides what Brer's just said. So yes, inspirational is good, but it has to be practical. The practicality is that if we actually went forward with some of these changes, that we wouldn't get the density because people wouldn't want to build in an area that's inaccessible. So that's the practicality for that. And so maybe if you don't like density, you should encourage these plans. That shuttle that you showed that the parking committee paid for and stuff was disaster, and we no longer run that. It had very little usage. It's just the kind of thing that you shouldn't be selling your plan with that, because it's an example of failure. I think that's most of my comments for this moment. I'll give people second chances on the board if you want, and might even be willing to hear from let's see if the board members have a second chance first. I don't see anyone. Anyone from the public wish to follow up with a comment about what they've heard so far? Tom, go ahead.
Just one question. When is the environmental report expected?
Shannon, are you available to speak on the time frame for the environmental impact report?
So we do not have a time frame other than generally 2022 and into 2023. So end of the year into early next year, but we don't have a date yet.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. All right, to be fair, I should let Sharon follow up, because I know she's not going to agree with everything I said. Go ahead, Sharon.
Okay. I can get this to work. Okay. I'd like to, I know we're talking about a lot of different types of transportation, modes of transportation. I'd like to remind you that we are going through, society is going through a period of change. We're changing, we're coming up with different types of transportation. Maybe we don't know what will end up the main one. We know other cities have already done this. San Francisco has bike, somebody was visiting there recently and was talking about all the bike lanes there. Other cities have made the change already, so we know it works, that when you allow people to use bikes, they will use it. Cities in China that are full of bikes. I've been there. If you allow people to use public transit, they will. New York uses public transit. 80% of the population doesn't even have a car. People walk. I visited Moscow. The subway comes every 3 minutes. You have to allow people to use public transit, and then they can use it. Right now, all we allow is cars. Thank you.
thanks. All right, any other comments before we adjourn for the evening? I will try to schedule an in-person meeting where we'll have a chance to hash this out in person for next month, since the city doesn't have a presentation next month. Any other comments? Seeing none, I will thank everyone. Oh, Christy, go ahead.
Thanks, Roy. Just for a last minute, I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce myself. I'm actually the Deputy Director over in the Mobility Division. So I work with Claudia, and I wanted to thank everybody for their comments today and questions, including those that I heard in the chat. And there are a lot of multimodal options, and I'm glad that this group is open to seeing some of that mode shift, because really our goals are about providing a variety of options for a variety of different people. So Roy, your comments on, it'd be great to see if there's studies that show that these shifts are happening is exactly what we want to look at and see that we are providing options for different people. Among those, you're probably familiar with our shared mobility device programs, the scooters. We're also working on flexible fleets for different neighborhood circulators that potentially could be beneficial for those last and first mile connections. So I just wanted to say thank you for your time on that.
All right, thanks everyone. Good evening, and we'll try to have a follow-up discussion next month in person. Thank you.